What is up, everybody? Welcome to Odyssey Sports 49ers Web Zone No Huddle podcast. I am Brian Rennick. I am joined by the one and only Zain. And later on in this episode, I will be joined by a special guest, Matt Barrows, beat writer for the 49ers over at The Athletic. But before we get to Matt, Zain, it's a big matchup this weekend. It's the return of the Mac. The 49ers versus the Florida Niners. The Dolphins are coming to Levi Stadium. I will be there. I'm excited. How are you feeling about this game?
I expect detailed notes the next show that we have when we have a wrap show or game after game show. You want to I want to see a full notepad. I want to see everything. I want to know what Mike McDaniel was wearing. I want to know what shoes he was wearing. I want to know what length his sleeves were. I want to know everything. And I know you're going to give us that great information. I really do. But
absolutely. It's supposed to be raining this weekend, possibly.
Yes.
So he might be wearing rain gear, but we'll see.
And it's interesting that you point that out as we dive right into this game. Rain, wet water.
Nice. Yeah. I like it.
But as we get into this game, and it's interesting to me because this is the first time that either of these teams have faced an opponent of this caliber. And you can argue that the Niners face the Chiefs, and the Chiefs are better than the Dolphins. And I would agree, but they were not at full strength. There were several players that were injured that are now coming back.
The 49ers were not at full strength.
Correct. They were not at full strength. And they were just starting to work Christian McCaffrey into the fold. We didn't know what the offense would look like. This was that stretch where the defense was really banged up and not playing well, right? The Atlanta KC stretch, and they were struggling there. It's a different defense now, and it's a different sort of feel to the team as well. Jimmy's been playing better, although he didn't have a stellar game, but the offensive line kind of contributed to that. And now you throw in this rain factor, and what's the thing that's going to slow down a really fast and speedy team? It's inclement weather. And the team that can run the ball and play defense typically has an advantage in that circumstance. So I'm really excited to see how they stack up against this team, because the last super high-flying team that they played again was the Chiefs, and they didn't really perform that well. So This is another kick at the can for a team that's really talented. Everybody knows that there's no secret on this show that you and I are big Mike McDaniel stans, right?
Yes.
We are absolutely.
Yes, for sure.
So what he's done down there has been phenomenal. And Tua has been playing very Jimmy-esque, if you will, right? They have similar statistics, and they have similar sort of things that they're asked to do in the offense. Tua has more mobility to him. But really, they kind of found lightning in the bottle with Mike McDaniel. And I'm actually happy to see the success that they've had of there. A lot of smack talk coming out of Miami, though. It's really funny to see that because guys that we like Mostert and Jeff Wilson and for some reason Trent Sherfield got into the mix. I don't know if he's even seen the field this year. Right?
1 year 49er Trent Sherfield.
Yeah, it's just weird, but it's going to be a really fun game because I like these types of games, these measuring stick games, because if you come out on top, it's a really huge confidence boost for your team. And if you lose by a little bit, it's still a confidence boost because it shows that you can hang in there. I think that it'll be a close game. I think it'll be back and forth. I don't know if it's going to be a track meet again because of the weather. And I think that Kyle's really going to try to control the pace of this game. Concern that I do have, Elijah Mitchell, as we know by now, is out several more weeks with another MCL injury. He's on the IR. So it's basically McCaffrey and one of our favorites, Jordan Mason, that are going to be in the backfield for the Niners here. And we'll have to see what they do with the running game. The offensive line did not have a good showing last game. And I'm hoping it was because of the short week, the weird week with Mexico. They get a chance to reset. They're at home, which is an advantage. And I mean, off to the races. I'm set, man. I'm ready to go.
Yeah. The cool thing about this game is it feels high stakes just because it's, the return of Mike McDaniel. Mm-hmm. It is an 8-3 Dolphins team, which means, like you said, it is a measuring stick game, right? You've got an opponent who is playing really well right now. You've got an offense that's coming in ranked number 2 overall in offensive DVOA. But the nice thing about this game as well is even if you lose this game, which I'm hoping they don't, obviously. I want the 49ers to win every game that they're in. I want them to go undefeated every season. But if you lose this game, it doesn't have a ton of impact on your playoff chances, right? The 49ers have a full game up on Seattle now, which is nice. There's a little bit of a buffer there. Obviously, we don't want to lose that buffer. But this is a non-conference game. There aren't any teams that the 49ers will be battling for playoff positioning where a loss to this team matters, right? So in all reality, it feels like a bigger deal than it is in terms of magnitude when you think about just thinking about this game. But more, I think ultimately it's, like you said, a measuring stick game. You know, it's a Kyle Shanahan versus Kyle Shanahan disciple, right? All of those cool storylines, but in the grand scheme of the 2022 season, not the biggest game. And so I'm excited. I'm excited because I feel like you could go into this game ready to just really ready for anything, right? And I keep thinking about this game. It's really hard for me to figure out how this game is going to go. And there's some really interesting matchups here in terms of offense versus defense for both sides of the ball, right? You've really got a tale of two teams. One team that has a decent offense and a really good defense, and then you've got another team that has a really good offense and not a great defense. And so is it going to come down to the more complete team, or are we going to look at something like you said, like we saw against the Chiefs, where this high-powered offense, you know, finally breaks through, and then the levee breaks, right? And you think about that Chiefs game, I think sometimes we forget it was a 1-score game going into the fourth quarter. They were close. That game was close, and then the Chiefs just absolutely broke it open. But that game felt, you know, like a blowout, when in reality, I mean, the final score was, but it was competitive for the first 3 quarters. So this is going to be a fun game. I'm excited. I'm excited for the game. I'm excited to be there. The rain as it stands right now, we said it earlier, it's supposed to be showers early in the morning, and then it's supposed to hold off and maybe not come back until the late afternoon. So there could be no rain at all for the game itself. That's my hope, obviously, as a fan that has to sit in it. But yeah, also it's Thursday, and those weather reports can change pretty quickly. So we'll have to see. But let's go ahead and kind of take a look at the matchups. And I wanted to start, we'll start with the 49ers offense versus the Dolphins defense. And so I'm just going to throw some numbers out for you in terms of DVOA rankings for the 49ers offense and then for the Dolphins defense. So as it stands right now, the 49ers offense is ranked 10th overall in offensive DVOA. They are 21st in rush DVOA, and they are 5th in pass DVOA, which is surprising, right? That's surprising for this team that many people view as a running team. And in reality, this team has been far more successful throwing the ball this season than they have rushing the ball. Though over their past, since this Christian McCaffrey trade, that rush DVOA, if you just isolate since McCaffrey has been there, I believe I think they're in the top 5. So they've gotten obviously better. The Dolphins defense overall 17th ranked in DVOA, 12th against the rush and 25th against the pass. So there's some unique matchups here, at least I think so, because if you look at the way to attack this Dolphins defense, it's through the air. They're 25th against the pass. They're actually decent defending the run. So my question is Kyle Shanahan going to put this game in Jimmy Garoppolo's hands? Because based on the matchup, that's really the game plan that he should probably be looking at. Now, will he? I don't know. But the good news in terms of offensive side of the ball, Christian McCaffrey was back at practice today, and so was Spencer Burford. So it looks like McCaffrey will be in the game, and Burford will as well. And then, like you said, Mitchell has gone out. Now it's going to be Ty Davis-Price and Jordan Mason. Haven't heard a whole lot about Tevin Coleman. I'm hoping that it's just those two, at least for this game. But we will see.
Yeah, I think that with looking at that Dolphins defense, you mentioned the DVOA numbers to further that. So they're 22nd in the league in passing yards allowed, and they are 10th in the league in rushing yards allowed. So I think that, to your point, that they're going to be able to be beat through the air if it's going to happen. And it's going to be a lot of the short, quick throws, similar to what we saw against, well, not necessarily against Arizona, but the idea of Jimmy kind of like being able to stem the tide a little bit in the first half, especially, is you'll see a similar game plan as we saw in Arizona and well, Mexico against Arizona. And I think a lot of the short, quick stuff, dump offs to the running backs, McCaffrey. The only thing that I'm kind of concerned about when we look at that, the safety outlet stuff, is that we don't know what we've got from Jordan Mason and TDP in terms of catching the ball. We know they can run. We know, especially Jordan Mason, we know he can run well, but can he be a receiving threat out of the backfield? And I think that that's a big deal this year in the offense that we haven't seen in years past, is having that just running back out of the backfield to dump off to as a safety outlet. And they haven't necessarily used it too much, but I think that at some point, if you have to dink and dunk a team to death, then do it. There was no Deebo at practice today, so that's one thing as well that we should be paying attention to very, very closely. He's got a hamstring injury, which is those soft tissue injuries you just never know. So I think that in that sense, it will lend a sort of credence to the idea that guys like George Kittle, guys like McCaffrey, Juszczyk may be more involved in passing game than they have in the past. McCaffrey, obviously, he's been heavily involved here and there, but I think that it's going to be that type of game where yards will be hard to come by, but you are going to have to be able to play 3 yards at a time, basically, and be okay with that. And can Kyle do that? I mean, we'll see. Yeah. The matchup that I'm kind of looking at right now, like they've got Melvin Ingram and Bradley Chubb as their defensive ends.
Yeah,
that is a huge matchup. And the way that the Niners offensive line played last week, they have to tighten that up. They have to give Jimmy time. It's not surprising that he threw an almost pick and he had several other throws that were kind of close. It's not surprising he was under pressure all day. He was getting battered all day. And if they allow that to happen again, then it's going to be supremely difficult, because you already know that you're down one of your starting running backs. I consider Elijah Mitchell and CMC start like 1A and 1B, right? They're both starters. So you're down one of your running backs and you're short on that at that position group, and you're going to have to throw the ball. And if they can't protect, I believe Melvin Ingram has 5 sacks this year, I think. He's got 5.
Yeah, they don't have impressive sack numbers. But again, Chubb came at the trade deadline, so he's only been with them for
3 games.
I want to say 3 games. Yeah,
3 games. He has 1.5 sacks in 3 games. Ingram has 5.
Okay.
So again, like Trent Williams, whoever Trent Williams has will be neutralized. I'm okay with that side, right? Sure. Left side of the line, we're fine with that, right? It's that right side that scares me, specifically like McGlinchey, right? And he will see one of Chubb or Ingram. And that is going to be what this game is. Good.
Yeah, and Chubb wrecked shop in that Denver game earlier this season when he was on Denver. He was in the backfield a lot, and so that's definitely something to take a look at. It's interesting you mentioned both Deebo and Kittle. Akash of Niners Nation tweeted this out earlier today. The Dolphins are 29th in DVOA defending tight ends in the passing game. The only teams worse are Arizona, Jacksonville, and New York. Right. And what did George Kittle do against Arizona? So you're right. This definitely could be a George Kittle game, especially if Deebo isn't going to go. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about, our illustrious colleague, Mr. Al Sacco, tweeted this out earlier today as well. Deebo Samuel has not been Deebo Samuel this season. And it's really kind of drastic. In 2021, now again, this is over the full season, right? We've only had 11 games so far. But in 2021, Deebo is getting 7.5 targets a game for almost 5 receptions and almost 88 yards a game. In 2022, the targets are there. The receptions are almost identical, but the yards, 51 yards. His depth of target has been so shallow. And so it's interesting. I said it earlier, Matt Barrows from The Athletic is going to be on. And that's going to be one of the questions that I ask him is what is his opinion on what's been going on with Deebo? Why has he been relatively quiet this season? Why haven't we seen more downfield routes from him and things like that? So it will definitely be interesting. Like I said, the Dolphins are better at defending the run than the pass. And so we'll see if Kyle Shanahan is finally willing to start kind of putting things in Jimmy's hands, because we've seen it before. We've seen him come out and be pass happy against teams that are selling out to stop the run. That's what we did against the Rams. So they did against the Cardinals, right? And so we've seen it. Now, are we going to see it again? And I think if the 49ers offense is going to be successful, it is going to be through the air against this Dolphins defense. But let's go ahead, switch gears. Let's look at this high-powered Dolphins offense against.
Sorry, one thought on Deebo.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
So with Deebo, I think what you're seeing is possibly just Kyle being Kyle and evolving his scheme to give the ball to guys that are thriving the most. And that's Brandon Ayuk, McCaffrey, Mitchell when he was healthy. And maybe it's just that type of scheme, right? Where it just revolves around the hot hand. And we saw this really, especially when in 2021, when they started running Deebo out of the backfield in the second half of the season. And that kind of was the jolt that got this team going. So I'm wondering if it's a similar sort of deal this year where they're going to start featuring Deebo a little bit more as we get closer to the playoffs to possibly have that same sort of effect where you haven't seen much of him and we have all these things that we want to do with him and there'll be a time and a place for it. And they may just unleash that closer to the playoffs. It's wishful thinking because he's an important piece of the offense. He's an important player. He was the MVP last year of the team. Yeah. You could argue.
Oh, but I don't think it's an argument.
Yeah, he was the team MVP last year. But I think that, it could be one of those things where are you just keeping him on ice until you need him? Or I'm hoping it's that because this is an embarrassment of riches on offense. And if you can't get all of them the ball at some point and get them in space at some point, then it's really not a good look.
Yeah. And I think, Kyle Shanahan is known for one of his the reputation that he has, right, is that he's really good at setting up plays at the beginning of the game that he's going to use again at the end of the game to use the defense's response to the play initially against them later in the game, right? And he's also notorious for not wanting to put things on tape too early. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, like you said, maybe that's what we're looking at. Maybe part of it is, hey, we're going to try and spread the ball around. We're not going to try and feature one guy or another, right? But I've got so many plans for this guy. I've got so many plans for this guy. So it will definitely be interesting. But part of the problem is sometimes that's to Kyle Shanahan's detriment. All of a sudden we get to the fourth quarter and it's like, great, you didn't use these plays, but now you're down 2 scores and now you've lost this game. So hopefully we see Deebo not only get involved, but start to be a bigger piece of this offense. Especially as we get later into the season. And then, obviously the hope is the postseason and they're well positioned for that, but we're going to have to see. But again, switching gears to this Dolphins offense versus the 49ers defense, I was doing a research, to prep for this episode. And here's one of the things that I found that I thought was really interesting. So the Dolphins have scored 30 plus points in their last 4 straight games. Okay. So the last 4 games they've played, they've scored 30 plus. But here's the opponents that they've scored those 30 plus points against, and then their defensive DVOA ranking. Detroit ranked 24th, Chicago 31st, Cleveland 29th, and Houston 27th. And then to dive even deeper, when they played Pittsburgh, who's ranked 14th, they scored 16 points. And then again, this is with Tua. I didn't look at the games that Tua wasn't in. There were 3, so I just looked at the games that Tua started. Mm-hmm. When they played New England, granted it was the first game of the season, but New England is currently ranked 2nd in defensive DVOA. They scored 20 points. They faced Baltimore in week 2. They scored 42 points. Baltimore's now 9th ranked in DVOA, and then they faced Buffalo in week 3. Buffalo is 3rd ranked in DVOA and they scored 21 points. So the only time this season that this team has scored more than 21 points against a top 15 defense was all the way back in week 2 against that Ravens defense. And so while they've earned the reputation of being a high flying offense, they really haven't faced a ton of stiff competition in the form of good defenses. And so that's really, to me, it's almost an unknown. They haven't faced a good defense since Tua's first game back from his concussion, which was against Pittsburgh. And if you remember watching that game, he threw almost 4 interceptions in that game, hit 4 different Steelers in the hands or the chest, and they dropped them. So the Dolphins haven't faced a defense of this caliber, arguably since week 1 or week 3, if you want to include Buffalo. And again, they scored 21 points. So I don't know. And not only that, but they could be down both of their starting tackles, which could be pretty huge. And so, yeah, I mean, this is the irresistible force, meaning the immovable object, right? Who is going to blink first? Is it going to be this 49ers defense that hasn't allowed a second half point in 4 straight games, that pitched a shutout last game, that hasn't allowed more than 9 points in a quarter in 19 straight quarters? Or is it going to be this high-powered Dolphins offense missing both tackles on a field that could be a little wet, a little slippery? I don't know.
Against what is arguably the best defensive line in the league, who is getting Eric Armstead back, by the way.
Yes.
As of this last hour, just tweeted out.
Yes.
Eric Armstead should be playing on Sunday, which is huge.
He told reporters he'd be playing.
Yep. So it is basically official. He should be playing Sunday. And if you look at the way that Miami operates, they try to run the ball, but they're not committed to it. So the last 5 games, here are the rushing totals for the last 5 games as a team. Against Minnesota, they which is going back to October 16th. Against Minnesota, they had 78 yards rushing. Next week against Pittsburgh, they had 95 yards rushing. Next week against the Lions, they had 82 yards rushing. After that, it was the Bears. It was that weird game where they were back and forth with Fields, and it was just like, that crazy game. And they ran for 252 yards. Mostert went off, and Jeff Wilson also scored that touchdown too. I believe that was the first game that they both played with them, I think. Yeah. So, that was the first game. Mm-hmm. And after that week, against Cleveland on November 13th, they rushed for 112 yards. And then last week, they basically were not rushing the ball at all. There's 36 yards against the Texans. So they're going to throw the ball. And there is one spot that I'm particularly worried about, aside from Tyreek Hill, because he could beat anybody. I'm very worried about Deommodore Lenoir against either of their receivers. And that's not to say Lenoir is a bad player at all. He's a very solid player. He's a good player. But man, against Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, like that's a mismatch that they're going to be going at. They're going to be going at that all day. And I fully expect Mike McDaniel to exploit that. And my hope is that due to those 2 tackles possibly being out, at least one looks like he's going to be out. I think Armstead's going to be out. He's got that chest injury. I don't know how he's going to play with that.
Yeah.
But due to that, I think, and I hope that they can get to the quarterback and rush him a little bit, get him off his spot, make him go through his reads quickly. If you can do that, then the coverage on the back end will take care of itself. I think that DeMeco Ryans plays a lot of zone here. It's a lot of, hey, we're not going to give up the big play, and we'll deal with 1,000 paper cuts, because that also gives our defense a chance to force turnovers, which is what they've been doing at a really good clip so far. So I think it's going to be that sort of game. A lot of cover 2, a lot of cover 3, a lot of zone. You'll see very little man, at least to start this game. You see very little man, and they're just going to be like, all right, Tua, you want to throw and pick us apart? We dare you. Just do it. Try it. And they'll probably end up with their share of turnovers because, like you said, he throws it to the other team, and it's up to them to be able to catch it.
Yeah. I mean, Tua, like I said, that game against Pittsburgh, there were 4 dropped interceptions, but on the books, he's only got 3, which kudos to him. Right. But I think if both tackles are out, I think what you're going to see is a ton of quick game. And so really it's going to be dependent upon the linebackers to tackle. Right. Really, I think that's going to be the difference in this game. If the 49ers can tackle, I think that they will be able to withstand this offense and they will come out with a victory. If the tackling is sloppy, if there's, if Hufanga's missing tackles, if those 3 linebackers, Azeez, Warner, and Greenlaw, if they're missing tackles, it's going to be a long day. Because like I said, I think with both tackles out against this defensive line, Mike McDaniel's seen this defensive line for, 5 years now. He knows what they're about. He knows what they're going to do. And so very similar to what Kyle Shanahan does when Trent Williams is out, is he's going to rely a lot on getting that ball out quick. And so, like I said, it's going to be incumbent upon those linebackers and safeties and corners to tackle and tackle well, because I don't think there's going to be a ton of opportunity let me rephrase that. It's not that there's not going to be a ton of opportunity for the defensive line to eat. I just think that they're not going to have any really long developing pass plays, especially if both tackles are out. So, and not only that, but Tua is, I believe, first in the league in time to throw, meaning that he is actually getting the ball out quicker than Jimmy Garoppolo, but he also leads the league in intended air yards, meaning that he's throwing it quick, but he's able to throw it quick and get it deep down the field because he's got two of the fastest receivers in the NFL. So, even with both of those tackles out, they may still be able to play the game that they want to play. But we're obviously going to have to see, obviously that's as Al would say, we'll just have to wait and see. Right. So, it's going to be a great game. I don't think it's going to be high scoring. I also don't think I think it's either going to be close. This is my prediction. It's either going to be a close, hard fought game, or it's going to be a Dolphins blowout. It is not going to be a 49ers blowout. I don't think there's any way that this is going to be a 49ers blowout. And so with that, let's get to our game predictions, and then we'll get to Matt Barrows from The Athletic. Do you want me to start, or do you want to start with your predictions, Zain?
Why don't you go ahead?
All right. Yeah. I'm going to be at this game. I desperately want to see the 49ers win this game. And I think, knowing the pattern that Kyle Shanahan has had against his former assistants, Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay, and now Mike McDaniel, right? Kyle Shanahan owns Sean McVay. Kyle Shanahan has pretty much owned Matt LaFleur. Just the one time that they've lost was that 2019. Or no, I guess they've lost twice, 2019 and 2020. But then got him back in the playoffs, and then got him back in the playoffs in 2021. He knows tendencies. He knows that they know tendencies. And so I think he's willing to zag, especially when facing these guys. And so I'm going to keep my pattern. I'm predicting a 49ers victory because I can't predict a loss to a game I'm going to. I just can't. It's just not within me. So I am going to predict a 49ers victory, and I'm going to say the 49ers win this game 30-27.
Okay. So I hate this matchup for the 49ers. I hate it because there's so much speed on the Dolphins side. And I hate that, because if it was just like a slogging team, like a plodding team, like, all right, cool, like the defense will be fine. But it's such a big deal when you have speed like that, like elite speed at every level on their offense.
Yeah.
And you have a quarterback who's delivering the ball on time and accurately, and a quarterback who's hot. Frankly, they won 5 games in a row. He's a hot quarterback. He's on a hot streak. And you've got an offensive line that kind of struggle. That's maybe a blip on the radar. That may be just one thing, like an outlier. But so let me back up and say that they've got games against Miami, Tampa Bay, and in Seattle next, right?
Yeah.
You got to get to 10 wins to make the playoffs. You have to get to 10, at least 10. I think that 10 will do it. As a wild card, 10 will do it, and maybe more for the division. But you got it to 10. They're at 7 now. That means that there's several other games at the end of the season that are winnable against the Commanders, Raiders, and Cardinals again, right? And I feel like you can get 2 wins out of that. So out of these 3 games, they need 1 win. And it's really hard for me to pick them against Brady when he comes here for the last time, which will probably be the last time. And that Seattle game terrifies me because I hate when they have to play up there for like the division or something like that. On a Thursday night, on a short week, when you know it's going to be rainy and miserable. So you need 1 out of these 3 games at least. And I hate the matchup, but I'm going to say that they're going to get this one. The Niners will get this one. So the Niners hopefully will win. It's going to be close. It's going to be a Robbie Gould field goal at the end, and they're going to win 28-27.
28-27, 1-point victory. Whew.
Yes.
Man, I don't know if my heart can take it, but hey, I'm glad
they
that we're
don't
on the
have to
same
have
page.
They don't have to have
They
it though,
don't.
right? That's
They
the thing.
don't.
Like that's the good thing
Yeah.
is that the Niners, especially thank you Raiders, appreciate that because of the Raiders
Yes.
last week. The Niners don't have to have this game, right? That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
But the problem is that if you don't win here, you put yourself in a must-win next week against Tom Brady, and I don't like
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
despite the fact whatever Tampa Bay is doing and all that stuff, you got to have this one. So I'm going to say we're going to see them win. Yep.
All right. I love it. All right. Thanks, Zain. I will be back with you and Al on Monday to recap this 49ers hopeful victory. But up next, Matt Barrows from The Athletic. All right. Again, Odyssey Sports 49ers Web Zone No Huddle podcast. I am Brian, and I am thrilled to be joined by personally my favorite beat writer, formerly of the Sacramento Bee, my local newspaper, and now of The Athletic, Matt Barrows. Matt, thanks again so much for your time. How are things going for you this evening?
Very well, and thank you for that nice intro, and thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So, we've got a big game coming up. I know I'm excited. I'm going to be at the game, which hopefully it's not raining too much or not at all would be ideal for me. Although that might slow down this Dolphins offense a little bit. But when it comes to this game, even though there aren't a ton of playoff implications, it's a non-conference opponent. Both teams are riding winning streaks, and both teams are coming in relatively healthy, although on offense, the 49ers are missing Elijah Mitchell, and it seems like the Dolphins might be missing Terron Armstead and possibly Austin Jackson. But let's look at the 49er side. With Elijah Mitchell, he makes such a large impact, even though he's only been on the field for the first game for a little bit, and then 2 games since coming back. How big of a loss do you think it is for the offense with Mitchell going down, and how do you see them filling the void?
It's a big loss. They just love the way that Mitchell runs the ball, and I don't know whether this is part and parcel to his injury history, but he runs with authority. He runs hard. So I mean, he's been getting. I think McCaffrey was averaging something like 86% of the offensive snaps when he was with the Panthers. Since he's been in San Francisco, he's been getting maybe 65%, and that's because they're perfectly, willing to give the ball to Mitchell for certain drives during a game. So it's great for everybody, and it's especially great for Christian McCaffrey, I think, because
Yeah.
he's just not overused like maybe he was in Carolina, and I think that really bodes well for the rest of the season and future seasons should McCaffrey continue to play for the 49ers. The second part of your question is I don't know, but I think it's really interesting. In games where Jordan Mason and Ty Davis Price have both been active, it's been Davis Price who's actually gotten the bulk of the carries, bulk of the offensive snaps. I think they like him as a tailback more than they like Jordan Mason. Now, who do they like more as a guy on the active roster in a game in which you do have McCaffrey and you do have Deebo and you do have Elijah Mitchell? Obviously, it's Mason because he's the better special teamers, and good on him for kind of carving that niche for himself, and giving himself the chance to be in a game like the Saints game on Sunday. But I mean, I think if it were all even, they would go with Ty Davis Price. Now, having said that, they were really impressed with Mason on Sunday. It really boils down to how comfortable they are with these guys during the week, how sharp the guys are on their game plan, this, that, and the others. But if I had to bet, I would put my money on Ty Davis Price just because he's gotten the carries in the past, whereas Mason hasn't. They really like him as a runner. I get a lot of is Ty Davis Price the second coming of Trey Sermon questions? And my answer is always no. No, I think they really like the way this guy runs. It would have helped him had he become a special teams ace in the off season. He didn't. And so Mason has sort of filled that niche, but that's how I see it going. But my level of confidence is not all that high. And then you've got the Tevin Coleman factor in there as well. That could be a curveball that comes on Saturday when he's elevated, and maybe he gets some carries on Sunday as well.
That was actually going to be my follow-up. Has there been any kind of indication that possibly Coleman could be up for that game, which would then make either Ty Davis Price or Jordan Mason probably not up, right? And that would again likely be Ty Davis Price because of Mason's special teams ability. And then on top of that, it's been my understanding from just the things that I've read that a lot of Jordan Mason not getting many carries on the within the offense has more to do with some I guess protection issues, not trusting him in pass protection. Is that the case? Is that why he hasn't got a lot of run with the offense, and have those issues gotten better as the season has progressed?
Yeah, I think they have. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, to me, the main reason is that it's just a crowded spot for most of the season. I mean, especially when you have Deebo back there, he's getting, I don't know, 8 to 10 snaps a game where he's lining up in the backfield. So, in games where we've got Elijah Mitchell, McCaffrey, Deebo, that fourth tailback isn't going to get any snaps. He's just not going to get into the game. But protection is always an issue. Elijah Mitchell was one of the few exceptions to that rule when it comes to a rookie. The quarterback is so valuable. The protection is so critical that the Bobby Turners and the Anthony Lynn's very, very old school coaches aren't going to let these guys into the game until they prove that. So yeah, that's definitely been an issue. I think, what are we going into week 13 here? It's certainly better than it was at the beginning of the season. And then the Coleman factor, I mean, if I'm the 49ers, first of all, I really feel like Tevin Coleman was one of the big reasons the team felt okay in trading Jeff Wilson to the Dolphins, because they said, okay, worst comes to worst, we're just we got Tevin Coleman. We really like Tevin Coleman, and we like him a lot more than other teams do. Mitchell's going to go on IR. I would imagine, even that though, with the restriction on the numbers of guys that you can bring up, that even that's not a given. I'm going to ask Shanahan that on Friday, and we'll see what he says. Sometimes he tries not to reveal these things, but my thought is that if you put Mitchell on IR, why not bring Coleman up to the active roster? It just makes him what I call poach proof. I mean, there's no way that another team steals him away, and Tevin Coleman can end up being a huge asset, a component in December if there are more injuries. And we've seen it happen. They come in spurts. They came in cornerback at spurts last year. They came in running back last year at spurts. The 49ers are trying to guard against that. And I think that having Coleman on the active roster, even if he's inactive for games, that's just a wise move moving forward.
Now, you mentioned Elijah Mitchell going on IR. The 49ers have 2 spots left, right? 2 activations from the IR, which means that if they put Mitchell on IR, then and there has been, a little bit of conversation surrounding Trey Lance and whether he could be back before the season ends or into the playoffs. But if they only have two activations left, if Mitchell goes on IR, that means that one of Mitchell, Lance, and Kinlaw are effectively done for the season. I don't want to switch gears too much, but the Kinlaw part kind of goes into one of the questions that Alan and actually David had. What is your feeling on Kinlaw, his status, and whether you think he'll be back this season as a contributor at all?
I mean, they haven't opened his practice window even to this point. The bottom line is I don't know the answer. Whenever we've talked to Kinlaw at his locker in recent weeks, he seemed in a good place and moving around well. He doesn't seem to have had a setback, but now would be the time. I mean, all these series of home games. You have the one game on turf, artificial turf in Seattle coming up. I just wonder whether they're gonna, get past that one and then do it, and then it's all it's all grass from
Right.
that point forward. Even Las Vegas plays on grass, so I think that they would feel better with that. But as far as the IR question, I would imagine that they want to keep one of those activations open. Heading into the playoffs. I mean, like I
Right.
said, I mean, what would happen if Charvarius Ward, sprained his MCL and is out 3 weeks going into week 18? He doesn't play week 18, but you still want him back for the championship game or something like that. So
Right.
it's a chess match, and they've got to kind of think this through. Another great question to ask Shanahan on Friday is just how carefully are you considering those very few remaining moves? And you're absolutely right. You need to kind of hoard them at this point. So, I mean, if they felt like Tevin Coleman isn't going to get snatched away, or they've got an agreement with him not to do that, then maybe they treat Mitchell like they did Eric Armstead. Know that this guy is going to be out 2 months or so. 6 to 8 weeks, and just kind of keep him on the active roster despite that.
Now you said have a deal with Coleman. The poaching rules from the practice squad, right? So Tevin Coleman's on the practice squad. Another team could sign Tevin Coleman off the practice squad. Does that, if a team tries to poach a player, does that player have to agree before they go, or do they just get poached and that's it?
Yeah, I mean, usually there's an agreement. Nobody wants to sign a player that doesn't want to be there.
Sure.
So usually there's discussion with the player's agent, this, that, and the other. But I don't think that that's necessary. I mean, it would be a really kind of Machiavellian thing to do for, say, with some team that could play the 49ers in the playoffs, for the Cowboys to kind of snatch him away so that he's not available. I'm sure the Cowboys are dealing with their own roster issues and may not have room, this, that, and the other. Most of these teams don't. I don't really ever hear about things like that, poison pills and such. It's probably frowned upon. But I don't think that there needs to be consent for that to happen.
Okay.
It's something to definitely consider. Like I said, I would do it just to have that reassurance that we're going to have this guy for the playoffs.
Right. Let's keep with the offense. Al Sacco, one of our hosts on the No Huddle podcast, tweeted this out earlier today, and just taking a look at Deebo Samuel's numbers through week 12 of the 2022 season versus his per game averages from 2021. And while his targets and receptions are relatively similar, his yardage is way down in terms of receptions and even his yardage in the run game. It felt like Deebo Samuel ran a lot of deeper routes, especially early on in the season in 2021 versus what he's running now. Do you notice anything different about Shanahan's usage of Deebo in this offense? Do you feel like it's part of a plan? Is he, I know he has a bit of a reputation as like almost like a long range planner where it's like, all right, I'm going to run this play in the first quarter to see how the defense responds. And then I'm going to run something very similar in the second half, but use what their response against them, especially as a play caller. But it also feels like he kind of saves plays sometimes for later in the season. Do you feel like maybe he's trying to save Deebo a little bit, or does it just feel like it's just too many playmakers, basically?
Yeah, I was going to say that. I mean, last year it was Deebo and no one else. I
Right.
mean, Brandon Ayuk didn't start becoming Brandon Ayuk until late in the season. We've already talked about the running back issue. It was George Kittle was in and out of the lineup as well, so they really had to lean on him, and they lean on him harder than I think that they ever wanted to. I mean, remember those 3 playoff games? Deebo came
Yeah.
out of each of those games at some point just because he was just so battered. So
Yeah.
there's that. I think the offensive line is, they're not blocking those outside runs as well as they want to, and I think that's just a factor of having inexperienced guys on that line. And I think that's going to get better over time. And then the other part is that Debo's not in as good shape as he was a year ago. I mean, he's dealt with one small injury, but those add up. I mean, yeah, you just don't get the conditioning that you get when you're healthy all season long. And Debo's a guy, as soon as he stops running, man, he can pack on the pounds. I don't know what he is right now, but I think it's really interesting that Wes Welker is coming back this week with the Dolphins because Welker was the Debo weight guy. He was the guy that was on Debo constantly to lose weight, and I think 220 was the max that Welker wanted him. I don't know what Debo weighs right now, but
Isn't that your wheelhouse though, Matt? Aren't you aren't you the one that can guess within 5 pounds?
I can. I am. I do. I do take a lot of pride, but I'm afraid of Debo.
Sure.
So
I would
I'm
be as
not
well.
gonna. I'm not because he's Debo. His nickname
Right.
isn't Buttercup.
Exactly.
It's Debo.
No.
So I'm not gonna put a number out there because I'm afraid of Debo. But I will say that I would be surprised if it's under 220. I'll just put it that way.
Fair enough. Speaking of, again, the offense, Jimmy's 4th in the NFL right now with a 1.3 interception percentage, right? It's Brady and then Tua, and I can't remember who's 3rd, and then Jimmy's 4th, which 1.3 is about a percentage point lower than his career average. There's been a little bit of discussion, I don't think in the media so much as on 49ers Twitter, which, has its reputation. But one question that I have is there can we attribute some of the growth in Jimmy Garoppolo's game this season, specifically the interception percentage, and just it seems like he has a bit of a better grasp mentally on the offense? Can we attribute that to Brian Griese, a quarterback coach who played the position at the highest level in the NFL, but also played the position within the Shanahan offense? Do we think that has allowed him to translate some of this a little bit better to Jimmy G than perhaps Rich Scangarello, who just lost his job as offensive coordinator at the University of Kentucky?
Well, I know that Garoppolo really likes Scangarello, so I don't think
Okay.
that Garoppolo would ever admit to that or cite that. But I mean, I do think having Greasy there has been an asset, and that was a big question about how they would get along. And Greasy famously said he'd never even talked to Garoppolo. This
Right.
was late in the off season when everybody still thought that he was going to be traded. So yeah, I think that's a factor. I really think that Christian McCaffrey is probably a bigger factor, just
Yeah.
because he's such a good outlet for Garoppolo and understands. Garoppolo said that he understands, route running like a quarterback does. And that's Garoppolo's forte. I mean, he's
Mhm.
very good on the short throws, getting it out quickly. So, McCaffrey is not just a good receiver, he's almost like a pass protector in that if Garoppolo feels nervous, instead of firing the ball, to that lurking linebacker, which has always
Right.
been his blind spot, he now looks for McCaffrey, as an outlet, and McCaffrey's on the sides there. So I think that probably more than anything else accounts for it. But to me, it's a big deal. I mean, the names that you mentioned, the company he keeps now, just a couple of years ago, the company he kept was Baker Mayfield and Jameis Winston and Sam Darnold, guys that threw a lot of picks, and he was right up there with his interception percentage with those. So it's been quite a dramatic turnaround for him, and I think that's the major stat you look at when you look at Jimmy Garoppolo's season this year.
Yeah, it feels like he's forcing less throws, especially into the middle of the field, because he knows that he has that outlet. And, I know that Kyle Shanahan offenses, there've always been those outlets. It's just now he has a superstar in that position, as opposed to, again, no shade, but a Tevin Coleman or even an Elijah Mitchell who catches balls, but isn't known as a receiver out of the backfield. And so, yeah, it feels like some of the bad decisions he's making, he's not making them because he can just toss it out to, an all-pro and Christian McCaffrey, which obviously is nice to have. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball, which, this defense has been incredible these past 4 games, really all season, outside of that Kansas City game, which is why this game feels like a really big, I guess, measuring stick, if you will, for this defense. They want to prove that Chiefs game was an outlier, as opposed to, when we come up against a good offense, we're going to get thrown on or run on or whatever. What DeMeco Ryans is likely gone after this season, right? It feels like that's pretty inevitable. Now, obviously things can change, and it kind of felt that way last year. And I know he interviewed with Minnesota and then said, you know what, I'm going to remove it. I'm going to stay at least another year. What do you feel like are the attributes that DeMeco Ryans has that is going to make him a good head coach in the NFL, or at the very least a head coach in the NFL, probably next season?
I mean, to a person, anyone who has ever worked with Ryans just absolutely adores the guy. He's sharp. He's self-effacing. These guys all have huge egos, and I'm sure Ryans does too. And he's got tremendous pride in what he does, but he doesn't rub you the wrong way. He's a guy that you want to play with, which is what the case when he was a player, and you want to play for. So, I mean, it's just the combination of knowing what he's doing and the type of guy he is. I think that's going to be very appealing to an NFL owner. My question is, he's a defensive coach, and usually when you're a bad team, you're starting over and you don't have a good quarterback, and you want to bring in, along with a new quarterback, usually a college quarterback, you want to bring in an offensive mind to sort of take that guy along. So that to me is the way that the 49ers retain DeMeco Ryans, is that all these teams, the Texans, the Panthers, whoever else is looking for a head coach in the offseason, wants to go offensive. To me, the Texans are the most interesting one because he's got such a history there. But they've got a defensive-minded head coach right now. So usually the team wants to do the opposite of what they just had. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how many teams go in a new direction. It's usually 5 or 6. So if it's 5 or 6, I like his chances.
If he does leave, if he does get a head coaching job somewhere else, what do you think the 49ers plan is to replace him? Do you feel like they've got some internal candidates that they might be looking at, or that they might like, just like when Saleh left, it was to elevate Ryans? Obviously Vic Fangio's name kind of hangs out there a little bit. Do you feel like it would be an outside hire? Would it be an inside hire? Is Vic Fangio a viable candidate? What is your take on it?
I've seen Vic Fangio show up at practice at random 3 times this year. So he's obviously got a good relationship with Kyle Shanahan. And I think Shanahan saw Sean McVay team up with Wade Phillips for a few years and really liked that. the 49ers run into a Vic Fangio defense every other week, it seems like. Sort of copying that Fangio style of defense. And it's all the rage right now. And so I just can only imagine that Shanahan would want to add the real McCoy if he could. The big question there to me is Nick Bosa,
right?
Who made no bones about. Remember back in 19, it was either he goes to the Cardinals at 1 or he goes to the 49ers at 2. Cardinals at the time were running a 3-4, and Bosa, like I said, made no bones about preferring to play in a 4-3.
Yeah, wants to put his hand in the dirt,
hand in the ground, defensive end versus a stand-up linebacker, which is what his brother does now in I was going to say San Diego, in Los Angeles for the Chargers. And I don't think Joey Bosa is as happy in that role as Nick Bosa is with that 3-point stance in San Francisco. So that would have to be something that would have to be discussed. And then Kasurik is the other thing. I mean, I think the 49ers will say, listen, we really want to keep Chris Kasurik, and Kasurik plays a specific type of defensive line. So if Fangio can't acquiesce to that, I'm not sure it works. Fangio could just take Nick Bosa aside and say, hey, look, in 2012, Aldon Smith played outside linebacker, and I forget what his total was. You probably remember 18 and a half sack.
Yeah, I think I was 19. I had 19 in my head, but
it was
something around there.
Gigantic number. Noting that you can get a lot of stacks, get a lot of freedom. He might even actually be able to convince him. You're going to see fewer double teams, this, that, and the other if you do what I want you to do. So it's a very interesting question moving forward. Should Ryans get that job? As far as internal candidates, the only one that sticks out to me is Corey Undlin, the secondary coach. And I think he's done a good job. I think they like him. He did it for one season in Detroit. Detroit wasn't very good. And that's why Undlin is here now. But he'd be the only one that I think is DC material.
He was on that Matt Patricia staff, right? That's where he was.
I think so. I forget when. Right. Patricia got there. He had been in Detroit for a few years, so he was familiar with the personnel.
Before we get you out of here, Matt, we are starting to look at the playoffs, right? And the 49ers are currently positioned as a number 3 seed in the NFC, behind the Eagles, behind the Vikings, and then Tampa Bay or whoever decides to win the NFC South with maybe a losing record as the 4 seed. Outside of the Eagles, who are obviously hot right now, they've got 1 loss. Is there any team that you feel is the biggest threat to this 49ers team if they were to meet in the postseason?
No. I even think that the 49ers are more talented than the Eagles. I mean, I think that's a really great game. The Seahawks have mystique about them, and we'll see if that holds true on December 15. But the 49ers had a relatively easy game against them in week 2, despite losing their starting quarterback. They beat the Cowboys in Dallas last year. The Vikings seem vulnerable. You never want to play Tom Brady, I don't think, in a big game. So that would be an issue. But the 49ers are just loaded. They're going to be more talented than any team in the NFC. And, back to your original questions, I mean, that's what makes this Dolphins game so interesting, because it would be a big confidence boost that, okay, we can hang with these top offenses, which are really all in the AFC right now. So it's probably the 3 best teams, I think, are the Eagles, the Chiefs, and the Bills. So, beating Tua and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Raheem Mostert and Mike McDaniel, would be a nice feather in their cap and like I said, a nice confidence boost that, hey, we could take on a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes or whoever comes our way in the playoffs.
One last question, and this is Jimmy Garoppolo related, just because we got to talk about Jimmy Garoppolo. What you were one of the ones that reported that it already felt like Jimmy Garoppolo was no longer a part of this team in the offseason, right? They hadn't invited him to OTAs. I mean, he just his presence wasn't anywhere. Then this felt like surprise restructure to come back, and then Trey goes down in week 2. Jimmy Garoppolo steps in. If Jimmy Garoppolo leads this team to a Super Bowl victory, does Jimmy Garoppolo return as the quarterback for the 49ers? And or is there any scenario where maybe they look to tag him for a year, or tag and trade, which I know doesn't really work that much in the NFL, but I mean, there are opportunities for that. What is your feeling on what this organization would do if Jimmy Garoppolo leads this team to a Super Bowl victory?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the only scenario where he comes back is if he leads this team to a Super Bowl victory. Because if he doesn't, then we're back to 2019. It's like,
boat,
he's good, but he can't win the big game against a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen. So, I mean, I feel like Jimmy Garoppolo could set the world on fire between now and February 12. And if he's flat on February 12, or even if they lose the game, I mean, you mentioned the 49ers Twitter, they'll turn on him.
Oh yeah.
So I feel like that's the only scenario where he comes back, and I don't think that they can franchise him. I think that's written into the contract that that's not an option. Let's say that they don't win the Super Bowl. I don't think that Jimmy Garoppolo comes back. I do think that they are going to want a veteran quarterback. Tom Brady's name is going to be bandied about a lot. Aaron Rodgers' name is going to be bandied about a lot. So I think that's the logical, next step short of a Super Bowl victory for San Francisco.
Oh, it's been an awesome season, and it feels like this team is on its way towards at least a Super Bowl berth. Matt Barrows, I appreciate your time so much. Tell everybody where they can read your stuff, and go ahead and plug your podcast as well.
Yeah, well, you can read my stuff at The Athletic. We have a pod at The Athletic that I do with David Lombardi and Dennis Brown, the ex-49er defensive tackle. And then all of our stuff we put up on Twitter. So the easy way to find the links is at Matt Barrows on Twitter. And we have a new story up every day.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much, Matt. This is Brian for the Odyssey Sports 49ers Web Zone No Huddle podcast. Tthanks for listening.
9-0-3, 1-2-3.